Hi folks, I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hello everybody, I'm Ken Calvert alongside Father Joe Grimaldi, and we'd like to welcome you to the Father Joe Grimaldi Podcast. The Father Joe Grimaldi Podcast, proudly supported by our good friends at Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln. The Lincoln Summer Invitation Sales Event is in its final days. That means right now is the best time to purchase or lease any one of the exciting Lincoln vehicles. Do you realize it's already time to start thinking about the all-new 2020 lineup that's coming in? Yeah, that means it's just a matter of weeks before our inventory lot will be overflowing, and we need to make our best deals to free up that space. That's right, the Lincoln MKC, the Nautilus, the Navigator, the Aviator, Continental, MKZ, they are all priced to move and move now. Stop by Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln, 12 Mile and Telegraph in Southfield. Mention you heard about it on the Father Joe Podcast, and you'll get extra savings, additional savings, oh yeah. Shop online at starlincoln.com. That's starlincoln.com, and tell them Father Joe sent you. This is thank you, Director. Father Joe Grimaldi has given me the you're on sign. Floor Director.
The light is on.
The floor Director, and also the star of the program.
No stars.
The Father Joe Grimaldi Podcast. I am going to bring up a topic today that I think you are probably much more familiar with than I am, and it's Alzheimer's. We're going to talk about Alzheimer's today. I heard a commercial, and it's been running on radio. Perhaps those of you out there as well have heard about it, where the fellow says, gee, I was with my mom the other day as a passenger, came to a stop sign, didn't know what to do. She didn't know whether to stay right there and not move, or to wait, or not. And all of a sudden, I thought, Mom, something's going on. It was a forecast of something no one wants to hear. Alzheimer's. First of all, what's your experience with Alzheimer's as a senior Catholic priest?
I'm a very, I'm very, very interested in Alzheimer's for a number of reasons. Because of people I know that I visit that have it, and also some family members involved as well. But here, people that I just visit at various places, it's interesting how all of a sudden most of the senior residences also have what they call memory care. And memory care is for those people who are slowly developing into Alzheimer's. The one thing that gives me some hope that they will find some sort of a cure for this is that they already can identify it physically in the brain.
Yeah.
They can identify that it is Alzheimer's. You know, very often we mix up terms, dementia, and is it just old age forgetfulness, what we used to call in the old days senility. All of these terms are thrown around in so many different ways. But Alzheimer's is definitely a special disease. I would say this, that to simplify the distinction, because one of the things that happens as you grow older, our brain is filled with so much detail. And as we grow older, more and more is crammed into our brains. And so that we easily forget names, where we used to be good at that at times. And then some people say, oh, I must be getting Alzheimer's. It has nothing to do with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
It's simply that the brain is crowded with a lot of information, and that has to be weeded out.
So true.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention, too, is simplification of the what is Alzheimer's and what is anything else, is if you lose your keys to the car and you don't know where they are, that's a natural event. If you see the keys in your hands and you don't know what they're for, that's serious. And so that becomes
Yeah.
what might be considered the beginnings of, or even the onset of, Alzheimer's. There are very sad situations that I've encountered where a husband for a number of years, mind you, would have lunch with his wife, and she would not know who he is. It's got to be heart-wrenching for the husband. She has no idea. There's another situation that I encountered, which I don't like to be funny when we discuss this kind of thing, but it was something that brought a smile, and it was very sad when the wife visited the husband in the nursing home, I should say the memory care home, which was for Alzheimer's, and the husband introduces the wife to his girlfriend, and no idea. And so all she can say is, "Nice to meet you," this type of thing. But it's a very sad situation. I have some hopes that we're making some progress medically, and so that maybe they can come up with some solutions to help people in a better way. This memory care situation seems to be working well in a number of the senior residences. Very often a husband and a wife can live in the same apartment in these senior residences, even though one has Alzheimer's, the other doesn't. However, when it becomes too acute, what happens is they're able to separate them, because these places that have memory care also have independent living. So one of them, whether it's the husband or the wife, the one who has Alzheimer's stays in the memory care unit, whereas the other will go to the independent unit. And so it's difficult, but at least they're on the same campus. Usually they could see each other every day. As far as the medical routes, I don't have medical knowledge to really say what causes it, what is it. The only thing I could say is this, that many, many years ago, not many, just many years ago, we didn't say Alzheimer's. We didn't know Alzheimer's. We didn't know what the heck it was. And one of the things that I think about is this, that many years ago we didn't live as long as we do.
Yeah.
And people may have had what we called at that time, a little bit of senility.
Getting old.
Right. And they're getting old, but they died
Forgetful. I remember
Yeah.
forgetful. He's getting,
Yeah.
Grandpa's getting forgetful.
Yeah.
You know. So-
But now, of course, people are living way beyond 60, 70, 80. And so they are able to diagnose that it's not just forgetfulness, but it is the disease of Alzheimer's.
you see it with close friends as well.
I've seen it this morning. Yeah.
And family members, you were saying.
Yes.
So do you see the different stages of it?
If you're not living with the individual, you don't see the stages as well. The thing is this, that the person who has to live with the person who has Alzheimer's, they need a lot of assistance.
Yeah.
They need the help, whatever help they can get. Because what happens is, first, there is absolute denial. Nope, she's just a little bit, forgetful, and it's going to be okay. And then, when the person keeps repeating things, if that's one of the results, well then, the partner who is in good shape says, "What is wrong with you? Why are you repeating?" There's anger issues that come about because of the denial, okay?
Yeah.
So, and then you really don't know how to react with the individual. Very often the individual that has Alzheimer's forgets things like ordinary hygiene, cleaning themselves and the environment that they're in. They are also very angry sometimes. At one time, I was in charge of a residence as a side job, if you want. There were a whole bunch of these priests that had individual apartments on the one floor. And my job was to see that they were doing okay. But there was one in particular on a humorous...
Diagnosed with Alzheimer's or not?
Not really,
Okay, go
but
ahead.
serious forgetfulness.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And so I didn't, there was one who was receiving Meals on Wheels. And of course, the Meals on Wheels were piling up in the refrigerator, but he was not eating it. But then what he would do on occasion, he would go downstairs, because this was an apartment building, and he'd walk to the corner, and sure enough, what was that restaurant, Fridays?
TGI Fridays.
Yeah, he would go in, have a couple of drinks and dinner, and walk out.
Good for him.
And then they would call me because I was in charge.
Yeah.
Says, well, he didn't pay. And so when I spoke to the person said to me, well, I thought that was our dining room. Well, it's not your dining room, and so you can't do that. You have to pay. So eventually he was admitted into a memory care facility, and he lived out his life in a nice way, with a lot of forgetfulness, but in a very nice way.
Let me ask you this first.
Sure.
Have you encountered someone like, I'll never forget the day I was driving to work. I believe it was in the early 90s. I was working at a radio station, WLLZ. I was doing mornings at the time. And the all-night CBS broadcast said that Ronald Reagan had written a letter to America saying that he had Alzheimer's. And before it got to a point where he could no longer communicate or understand what was going on, he wanted to get out how thankful he was to serve the country. He literally had this incredibly beautiful letter, handwritten, describing his early days as an actor, and he was tough, and I'm ready to face it. And I thought, wow, this is the beginning of the end with the guy that we know, and I was a young man at the time. Have you encountered anyone that knows it's coming?
Yes, I have. Interestingly, not as dramatic, obviously, because
Reagan,
he
of
was
course,
the president.
Puts
but
a lot of chrome on it, if you will, or he puts a lot of interest, if you will.
Yeah, but people in similar situations, they know, they've heard, they've been told, they know that there's something wrong. They know that there is a serious dementia. They know that people are saying they repeat a lot. And so they go on the defensive when somebody says or corrects himself or herself. For example, if I say, hi, this is Joe. Oh, I know who you are. I remember that. I remember that because she's heard or he's heard that she can't remember stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they go on the defensive and they try to prove that. Now, as I said to you before, I think, and I'm no expert, but experience tells me, I've seen people who are very angry.
Yeah.
Not just the caregivers, but the actual person.
Yeah.
They get very angry. They get belligerent. They want to fight if they don't believe that you're trying to do them any good. And on the other hand, there are people that are much more light about it. Even the caregivers say, well, at least he or she says something new every time, even though it's a repetition, this type of thing.
Right.
So anyway, there's all different reactions. I'm not a doctor. I don't know the full extent of what's happening to people in the beginnings of Alzheimer's, but I have experienced talking with them.
But I'm thinking more about the power in the message that you can deliver to somebody who says, holy cow, I know your Father Joe. I know you. I've known you for years. I know your family. I know your friends. But I'm starting to forget things, and I knew I had an issue, and I've just been diagnosed with, and it's affirmative, I have Alzheimer's. Pray for me, because this is the last bit of time that we're going to have really lucid individuals one-on-one. How do people handle that, and how do you react? as a priest?
I think the reaction has to be one of empathy. In other words, listening to them. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I just wish it weren't so. You can't deny it because they know it, okay?
Yeah.
So it's not say, oh, no, you don't really have that. No, it's better just to listen, be compassionate, be loving as much as you can. I don't think there's any easy solution to it. I wish there were. So it's a matter of being compassionate, listening, and then seeing what the reaction is. Huh?
Yeah.
Because your reaction has to coordinate with their reaction. I don't think that if you keep repeating some silly thing that they think is silly, okay.
It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine.
No, that's not going to work. So I think a matter of listening, basically, and you could also express your own thoughts. I'm sorry about that.
Uh-huh. Well, first of all, somebody that has the gumption, the spirit, the will to present it to you, just, say, hey, by the way, I've got it, pray for me. I commend those people.
Definitely.
I mean, they took something really special that they still have and brought it to the finality of their party.
Yes.
Their lucid party.
Right.
And I can't think of, and I don't know why, but a beautiful day, driving my car, hear a commercial from my roots in radio. You don't normally listen to commercials, but this one struck me, Alzheimer's, and you hear more and more and more about it. And I think you nailed it when you said it's because our lifelines are getting longer. I think people ought to be careful throwing around expressions like my crazy uncle, because your crazy uncle has or had Alzheimer's. My grandfather, like I told you, there's no doubt now, he had Alzheimer's. And I find it to be maybe as bad as cancer is. And cancer, please, dear God, please help us solve that riddle so nobody ever has to have it again. Same time, Alzheimer's is just, I think, equally as unfair in terms of diagnosis.
It's devastating.
Yeah, it really, truly is. And I'm sure that within your ranks, priests with Alzheimer's, that's got to be unusual for you to go face to face with a priest that no longer realizes he's a Catholic priest.
Yeah.
He devoted his entire life to a flock, a parish. What's that like?
Well, as they say, you have to listen, be compassionate, because if we belittle what's being said, trivialize it, well, then they have lucid moments in the beginnings.
Yeah.
It's not completely gone.
Oh, I know.
So if you lie to them, they know that you're lying to them.
In a weird, strange way, I think that's the mean-spirited side of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
It takes its time stealing memories.
Little by little.
Yeah.
And you can't lie to them because they know you're lying.
Yeah.
Even though you're trying to be nice. Huh?
Yeah.
So the best thing to do, in my mind anyway, is to be compassionate.
Yeah.
Say that's a rotten situation. All we can do is pray, and we hope for the best. But trying to listen to the person as he vents or she vents, and whatever she or he can recognize anyway.
The symptoms, although the rate at which the disease progresses varies, on average, a person with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after the diagnosis. But some can live as long as 20 years depending upon the factors. Boy, it's a tough one, Joe. It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, you pray so hard for both sides of it, but the survivors, they've got a heavy lift, don't they?
It's very difficult for the caregivers. The caregivers need a lot of help, because they're going through a lot of different things that, I've seen people live 20 and 30 years beyond the diagnosis because their hearts were healthy, physically they were in good shape, and so the mind is what's going. Mm-hmm. And so the caregiver has to be able to understand that and has to be able to be compassionate and yet be realistic, and also make sure not to get angry because a person is repeating.
Impossible to do on occasion.
I know it is. You do get upset. And
that's where you come in.
Yeah.
That's when they come to you.
That's right. But it becomes a difficult situation. There really is. I have a lot of hope, though. I do
So do
see
I.
progress being made.
The Catholic Church, are they getting involved? Do you notice more and more that there may be fundraisers or weekends devoted to explaining and understanding and talking about Alzheimer's so that the faithful, in quotes, can have a better recognition and understanding of what's going on?
Yes, the church has always been involved whenever
Right.
these things happen. And so they are involved. I can't name a particular
But
organization.
I'm sorry, but because of the fact that there are so many people who are up in years that are so dependent upon the Catholic Church, it's part of their regular order, where you have Bob and Martha were always regular attendees at this Mass, this Mass, this Mass, and all of a sudden the one starts to disassociate with that routine. That happens too.
It happens, but what happens is by that time they start looking for a place where they could live.
Okay.
For memory care, that type of thing. So the parish itself would not experience immediate interaction with people that have Alzheimer's, but they do go out to visit them if you want.
Right.
Because once it begins, people have to take some measures on how we're going to handle this. And if they're still able to interact, we better look for a nice place that has memory care units so that as the individual progresses, I hate to use the word progress, but you know what I mean.
Well,
and
it's
then,
going to, yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually they could have a place to be. So you don't see them too often in the parish. That's one thing you don't see, because by the time things are starting to become evident, they are making moves to other places. Mm-hmm. So the church goes to these other places on a regular basis so that they do interact with people who are there and also with the caregivers.
The costs are really, really high, and that's another area that we could get into, but we highly recommend that you attend fundraisers or whatever the case may be. I think the recognition factor is really brought Alzheimer's to the forefront right now, and I think that people are really paying attention. And I do think that they're making strides and progress in the area of hopefully having some sort of a cure. Final portion of the podcast would just be the fact that I always find it amazing that given all of that memory that's taken away, there are certain parts of that memory that are just as like it happened yesterday. Phil, 1952, we had served in World War II together. Yeah. He could play a trumpet better than any guy I knew. Anybody heard from Phil? Why does he remember Phil but doesn't remember his own wife?
Another thing that happens enough, if people who have in their youth spoke a different language, they revert to that language very often.
Really?
So another one, for example, someone who has a German background and as a youth spoke German all the time, and then of course no longer spoke German after that in their adult life, but with the Alzheimer's very often, not always, but very often revert to speaking their original language.
Really?
Yeah. So
I did not know that.
That causes, yes.
Wow.
I mean, you can snap them out of it because, especially if the caregiver is a husband or a wife, you might say, come on now, you're speaking German, or whatever it is.
I've often said that if you need proof positive that there is a God, just think about the brain, the human brain.
Oh.
Think about the human brain and the storage capacity that we have, the feelings that we have and should share on a regular basis. But we're going to continue with both of the topics that we covered here this weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Grimaldi Podcast. I'm Ken Calvert.
I look forward to it as well. Take care. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.